To get started, this is Fred Barstein, CEO of TPSU and TRAU, and welcome to our first virtual town hall. And what we thought is, we're not able to travel and do our regular TPSU programs, which are being rescheduled. And we thought it would be a good idea for all of us to connect remotely. I think that's going to become the new normal, where more and more of us are going to be communicating and working remotely. So we're going to be doing these town halls. We're planning on doing them every Friday at 1 o'clock. And so our first virtual town hall is about really communicating. What are the best practices, what we're hearing, and what we wanted to have some of our top TPSU lecturers talk about what they're saying to plan sponsor clients, to the participants, what they're hearing back in terms of feedback, what are some of the questions that they're getting, how they're communicating to different audiences, different age groups, demographics, what are the different options that people have that may be in need for distribution and use of their assets. And then finally, what are the best means of communications? We will be having poll questions after each one of these 4 tranches, and you will be given the opportunity to answer that poll so you can see what your peers are doing on that. So that's a little bit of the format. Our moderator today is Tom Foster. Tom is now the managing partner for managing director of the TRAU Speakers Bureau. Tom is a 40-year industry veteran. He's also an attorney. Most recently, he was the national spokesperson for MassMutual and for that Hartford. Our panelists include Daniel Bryant, who is a TPSU lecturer. He's done about 30 programs. He covers Chicago, Denver, and Nashville for us. He is the president of national sales for retirement wealth at Sheridan Road, where he was co-founder, which is now part of Hub International. Chris Bixton, a CKP, along with Daniel, is also an adjunct lecturer, and he covers Oklahoma City, Oklahoma actually, Indianapolis, Louisville, St. Louis. Chris is a principal at Pension Consultants, which is based in Springfield, Missouri, Midwest-based RIA, who were one of the first fiduciary fee-based advisors starting in 1995. And last but not least, we have Cameron Jones, CKP. He covers 3 of our TPSU programs zones with north of LA and UCLA, LA, as well as Orange County. He's an assistant vice president at NFP, and before that he was RPAG on that. So that is our very, very esteemed panel. And one thing, as I was putting the bios together that I hadn't realized before, is Daniel was on the Dartmouth baseball team. Chris was on the Missouri State basketball team. Cameron Jones was on the University of Pennsylvania football team. And Tom played a linebacker and a quarterback at Holy Cross. So we have a really athletic group. I went to Boston College, and I was small, but I was also very slow. So that combination eliminated all of my athletic abilities. So we do have a very, very talented group of people on the phone. And we also have Steph Chalk, who's our executive director, and he will be fielding questions from you. And we ask you, if you do have questions, we're not going to open this up the phone, but if you do have questions, just submit them, and we'll be asking those questions throughout the program, hopefully by the subjects that we have on that. and he's there as well. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Tom. Tom, thank you.
Thank you, Fred, and thank you, everyone, for taking time from your busy schedule in these very troubled times. As Fred mentioned, I've been in this business for over 40 years, and I think this is probably one of the most troubling times that I've gone through in this industry, and I think it's very important that we all join together and share ideas and help each other get through this. And that's why I think the panel that we've gathered today is really there to help you understand how to communicate with your employees and also how to deal with other employers in a similar business. So we're going to start today with a question, and the question is, you know, as I said, I've been in this a long time, and I know we have to band together, and it's always good to reach out to each other. And so what I want to know is, you know, all of you that are on the line right now are the front line. You're dealing with clients on a day-to-day basis. So we want to all hear from you as to, first of all, what are you hearing from your clients, and how are you responding? And when you have to communicate, how many of you have communicated with your clients over the last few weeks, and what are they saying? So to start us off, Daniel, why don't you give us your perspective on what you're hearing and what you're saying, and how you're communicating this to your employees and to participants.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks. Thanks for having me, and thanks for everybody joining today. I would just sort of like to say, you know, when we're talking about communication with our clients and prospective clients, and really any plan sponsor that has a plan, we need to know a couple things. And I talk about this all the time, but number one, we have an entire generation of Americans, right, that are ill-equipped to retire. So we all know if we're on a committee, we're overseeing a retirement program, we know that those that are over 60 years old are not only vulnerable from a health perspective as it relates to this particular virus, but we also know that a vast majority of them are ill-equipped to retire. And then the second barbell on that front is that we know that the generation that's under 35 has never experienced any sort of market dislocation, total disruption in our economy, and what looks to be a recession coming down the pike in short order. So when we think about who we're communicating with, who our employees are, we have those two cohorts which need special attention. I would say in terms of communication, I just hung up about an hour ago with our entire consulting team. So we have clients in almost 40 states, and the feedback is the same across all areas in this country. So there is a sense of panic when it comes to our clients and our HR directors and CFOs in terms of how to communicate and how often should they communicate. So some of the questions we're hearing, I'm just going to lay out a few because I know my panelists have their insights as well, is everything from PTO, reduction in force, stopping or suspending a match, a safe harbor provision. All of these things are things that we're talking to our clients about en masse. We are also fielding questions around, no joke, this morning I had a client that said it's a national pizza chain. They sent a letter to their leasing agent and said, we are stopping paying our rent nationally. So we have to know that our clients are experiencing unbelievably disturbing times, and they're doing everything in their power to sort of conserve cash, conserve their resources, and then also provide, you know, a calming influence to their employees. So I'm going to leave it there because I think I can go down a number of these different fronts. But I would end by saying we're talking to every single client every day. We're talking to those that are on the committee to make sure they understand their roles and responsibilities, we think is very, very important. We want to make sure they're armed with the right information so they can answer the basic questions that their employees have when it comes to their plan and what they can do with the money in their plan. But most importantly, we want to be an advocate and make sure that they know they have a partner in not just today, but in the weeks and months to come.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. I think that's so important, is constant communication, making people feel safe and making them feel that they're not out there on an island all by themselves. They have you, they have the employer that's on the call today, and they also have the providers that they're working with. So what about you, Cameron? What are you seeing? What are you hearing from your clients, and how are you dealing with it?
Very similar to what Daniel experienced, which is, panic in the lunchroom and panic in the boardroom a little bit, or at least unease in certain parts of the country versus panic. But to the point of the message we're giving is, in the lunchroom to the participant level, I think Daniel brought up a point where a lot of the younger generation hasn't really seen a lot of this. So I think a lot of it's about giving that your employees some context. So, we've created a significant amount of participant memos that have been sent out to folks about the market to first show kind of what's happened with other epidemics in the past and how while the market took a hit, in pretty much every case, by the end of that year, actually the market was back up for things like SARS and swine flu and others that were similar to show, hey, the market has weathered this before. Don't panic. Don't pull your money out now and lock in those losses when the market's down. The other thing we've done is given a lot of perspective to other bear markets as well. And when you look at the last 5, actually, in the 5 years after those bear markets, what you'll see is, every those 5 years after each of those 5, 23 of the 25 years of observational period were actually positive after a bear market. So this again is just showing those participants that saying, hey, if you leave your money in, we keep all our oars in the water, we keep our money working for us in the market, eventually markets do bounce back. So a lot of it's been about giving perspective. And then the boardroom, same thing. It's stay the course. It's look at your investment policy statement, ensure that what that actually says, and continue that responsibility of monitoring those investment managers. I would lean on your advisors and your providers as much as possible to make sure you are dotting all your I's, crossing all your T's, and you're comfortable with all those managers, people, process, and philosophy to weather, this market. Just because we've seen a bull market for so long, a lot of these managers actually will excel in bear markets too. So just understanding and having those expectations has been very, very important.
I think that's great. Yeah, and I
this
think
is Fred.
Yeah.
Tom, we had a question from the audience about, are we talking about the retirement committees of their clients? And I would assume that all of these you guys are talking to clients almost exclusively. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Great.
Yes, I would. Yep, to participants, we're helping tell them to weather the storm, and to clients, the same thing. Keep following your fiduciary best practices and that prudent process.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, but it's all within the client base. Great. Okay, sorry, Tom, go ahead.
Oh, no problem. And so I do think it's very important, as you said, Cameron, it's easy to say things, but if you can show past history and how we've weathered the storm in those past histories, I think that does give them such a sense of calming to understand it's happened before, it might happen again, but in the meantime, let's see what we have to deal with. And Chris, you were going to make some final comments on this tranche.
Sure. I mean, I agree with Dan. I mean, people are panicking. There's also, we've got social distancing. And when you combine that with panicking, it just exasperates the issue. And plan sponsors, participants alike, we've never seen anything like this. Okay, but we hadn't seen anything like 08 or 09. And there's been several, we've never seen anything like this events, but we have seen down on more than one occasion as it relates to these never seen before events. And given time, we've made it through. I'll reference not necessarily a client or even a participant, but let me reference someone else I spoke to that represents what a lot of people are thinking. My daughter in college texted me, Dad, did you know the market crashed? She was 9 the last time it happened. It hit her at an emotional level, and she didn't have the same perspective that we do. And she asked the question, she said, Dad, do you think it'll be okay? I told her, I said, hey, it's not pleasant right now. I said, but let's persevere. We did it in 08, 09. We've done it before, and given time, we'll make it through.
And I think, like I said to Cameron, I think history is a good indicator as to what our future holds for us. And so I couldn't agree with you more on that point, Chris. And, let's look at our first poll question, because one of the things you mentioned, Daniel, was the fact that how are people dealing with their 401ks, and what about deferrals? So our first poll question, if we can put it up, I think is very important. And the first poll question is, what percentage of compensation are your plan participants continuing to defer to their 401k and 403bs? We'll give you 30 seconds to come up with that answer.
And maybe as we're doing that, Steph, are there any other questions that have come up, or questions that you might have from the audience? Yeah.
Yes, we do have a question, and the question is, what's the appropriate frequency that a committee or the plan sponsor should be communicating with participants? And this is couched around the information that comes out on a daily basis that we're seeing on the television and hearing on the radio is it seems nonstop. So is there an appropriate time period where you would communicate with all plan sponsors, and or where all plan sponsors should be communicating with participants? Is that a weekly issue, or is that every 2 weeks? What have you seen?
Daniel, why don't you start?
This is Daniel. So I would say a couple things. Number one, there's just a lot of we're being bombarded with news all over the place. A lot of it, candidly, is not truthful news, right? They're just, we've got all sorts of fake sort of emails going out. I've had a bunch of questions around some of those from some of our participants that have gone to HR directors and then forwarded to me. So I think that that is a great question. I think it should be well thought out. It should not be reactionary, and it should be well planned in terms of the communication that you have with your employees, because things are changing at a breakneck pace. What's true today might not be true tomorrow. So I think it should be measured in your response. So I think daily communication is not the way to go. I do think that, weekly or bi-weekly communication does make sense on specific topics. So I think those are the things that I would focus on, which are big picture items, really just sort of a calming influence to your employees. But again, depending upon industry, guys, these employers have much, they may be confronting much different scenarios depending upon the industry or depending upon the geography.
Great, thank you. And Steph, do we have any more questions before we go to our poll?
I think we're gonna go to our poll now, Tom,
Okay.
and it should be up on the screen. Do you see it, or would you like me to? Yeah, you see it. Okay, so
Yeah.
why don't you go?
Yeah, so here you see the poll results, and pretty overwhelmingly in favor of over 3 to 8. What do you think about that, Fred? What is your commentary around this poll?
I think what this is showing so far is that people are staying steady and they're not panicking in terms of changing too much. And I think that what we're seeing with this particular crisis is what we saw 10 years ago, is that there are a lot of more panic in other markets, but the 401k people stayed pretty steady to their 401k. That one of the things they wanted to keep contributing to was their 401k. And we're showing that so far, and it's very early, people are staying true to contributing and making sure that their contributions and deferrals stay pretty good. So that's, Tom, what do you think?
No, I think that's definitely a good indicator. And the other thing, we've been talking about, Fred, and all three of the speakers alluded to this, was the age involved and how different age groups are reacting differently to what's going on in the market. So our next question, I think, is very important. That is, we'd like to concentrate on client communications efforts next. And that is, there are currently 4 generations in the workforce. What methods are you using and your firm segmenting and targeting your client messaging for plan participants? The demographics, you've got millennials, you've got Gen X, Gen Y, you've got baby boomers, you've got various industries, job functions. How are you communicating with each one of these various groups to effectively communicate in the way that they need to be communicated to? So let's start with you on that question, Chris.
Okay. Well, I'd like to hit this in 2 manners. If we weren't in a crisis right now, I'd give you a different response in terms of those different demographics. But there's one basic segment of people at this very time that needs to be helped, and then let me reference this by a specific participant that we talked to. From a client, they're getting all these calls that say, "Hey, you probably fielded a lot of calls, but I want to know how to move to safe." I mean, all of these calls are coming in, and of course, that means, hey, can I transfer to cash? we need to tell people, hey, you can do that, but let's take a moment to address. Think about this. Buying when the market is high, wanting to sell when it's low, it's natural for many people. The desire to sell when the market is low, that can be very emotional. I mean, that's not just for the participants, but even the folks in HR and benefits that are dealing with people, it gets emotional. And while emotions serve a purpose in our lives, emotions can be terrible decision makers. So when a participant starts with something like, you've probably gotten a lot of calls like this, I think people are saying, hey, will you listen to me and can you help? So regardless, at this moment in time right now, regardless of their job, their function, their age, number one, give them time to talk and vent. Number two, acknowledge what they've said and what they're feeling. You can't tell a person they're not feeling a certain way. But then number three, give them a proper perspective. Let's be honest with them, but assuring. And then fourthly, from our standpoint, how we help is talk about the options. Hey, if you want to move to save, here's what you do. But in terms of options, what's your time horizon? Oh, you're 44 years old. You've got 21 years until you plan to retire. Hey, let's talk about that and illustrate that. Be assuring to them. Determine their risk tolerance. Address the proper diversification, explaining that. And some of the people that we've already been talking to over the last couple of weeks have said, you know what, you're always talking about diversification. That makes sense. But most of all, I think most of all, we need to help people know whether they are contributing enough to be on track for retirement. I mean, that previous poll that went up there, 3/4 of the respondents are contributing less than 8%. Okay? Fred said people are holding steady, but don't most experts say we need to save at least 10% of our income? We need to help people know whether they're on track. And what's interesting is when we go through this and listening and acknowledging and giving that proper perspective and the options, some of the responses are hey, I feel better now. And, it helps them have a proper perspective and not be emotional.
Good. Now, Daniel, Chris had mentioned that if you have someone who's in their 40s, their time horizon is much longer. But obviously, we've got different age groups, like somebody that's getting close to retirement. So what are you doing in terms of communicating with those people that are older, that are getting close to retirement in this time of, a serious issue in our industry? How are you communicating with them differently than you're communicating with someone who's 40?
Yeah, so we have an entire program. We call it the Retirement Income Lens. So we actually engage employers we asked to have mandatory complimentary sit downs with everybody over 58 years old. So literally it's a half hour sort of sit down and go through and help them prepare both emotionally as well as financially for that next life journey of theirs. And so this situation we're in today has exacerbated the need for that. So while I totally agree what was just said, the most vulnerable and at risk group is that group that is nearing retirement. We don't know exactly what their asset allocation looks like, but we do know they've got a meaningful stock portfolio, and that has taken a hit. So if they're within 2 to 5 years of retirement, we know the market will come back, but they may not have the time. So we sit down first and foremost. Literally, we were doing that all morning today, saying we need to sit down with everybody who's over 60, over 58, whatever the right demarcation line is, and sit down and understand their entire situation to see whether or not they're on track to retire when they want to and whether they are not. And so these families, these individuals, they are the most at risk today. And we think it's our obligation, honestly, to help them. First and foremost, is that cohort.
Now, what about you, Cameron? What are you doing to communicate to these various groups? We've looked at the low 40s, and then we've looked at people that are close to retirement. How do you segment and go after those various groups? Because we don't only have the 40s and below and the 50s and above. We've got a lot of other groups we have to deal with. Are you specifically targeting those segments and coming up with campaigns specifically for them?
Yeah, we definitely have, and yes, we definitely have, and from a life stage perspective, I think Daniel hit it on the head. Where different life stages are going to require different messaging, but I think also how you're getting that messaging to people is very important. And so what we found with very large organizations like NFP, as an example, we have about 6,000 employees, right? You can't necessarily have one-on-one meetings with every single employee to walk through this. So what we've found to be very effective when applicable is like a train the trainer type approach, where right now, especially with everybody working from home, we've encouraged all of our managers to talk to all of our employees, daily through Skype, through some sort of FaceTime. Pretty much everybody at any generation has access to a mobile phone at this point. But that in-person communication is great. But by training the trainer on kind of what Chris laid out, which is that empathy story, that understanding where people are, especially as you're going through these really tough personal times and corporate times, I think that's extremely important to engage them one-on-one and to teach those people that are your managers, some nice messaging, giving them your advisors information, giving them your providers information. Say, hey, take advantage, lean on the people that can help walk you through these conversations, through these tough times, and have the one-on-one conversations like Daniel's having. The other thing I'd recommend is something like a Slack or a Workplace by Facebook. There's a question on how often do you push content. Well, I think it's also where you host content. NFP just happens to use Workplace by Facebook, where we have a whole coronavirus group now we've created where we can all get all the newest updates on coronavirus, how that impacts our benefits, our own personal finances, but also how it impacts our business and how we're consulting clients. So we're always engaged, but you're not necessarily overwhelming somebody by that ability to host and let people come to the information.
Great. But I think it is very important to segment and have it set up so each segment has a specific game plan to go by. And, speaking of segments, I think our next poll question is very important to this discussion. So let's put up our next poll question. As you can see, within your organization, which generation seems to be the most competent? And while we're doing that, Steph, let's go to our questions. Do we have any specific questions at this point?
We do, and we have a question specifically for Daniel, and I'm going to combine that with an additional question. But Daniel, the question is, what does your 30-minute sit-down conversation look and sound like? And then secondarily, we have a question of, are the panelists giving financial advice to participants when they meet with them to review? So if you could kind of combine those two on the 30 minutes, what does that look like, and how close are you coming to providing advice?
Sure. So that's a great question. So we have an entire sort of wealth management division at Sheridan Road, and we've got retirement income specialists, which is this is all they do. So what we do in the 30 minutes sort of sit down. So it's really it's consultative. We ask that they fill out a questionnaire before we get together. We ask them to bring certain materials that we can talk through when we get together. But when you sit down with somebody for a complimentary 15 minutes or 30 minutes, the conversation, and for anyone who has dealt directly or worked directly with a participant, the conversation, we are oftentimes, I know my colleagues on this call appreciate this, we're often the only person they've ever talked to about these topics, right? So, and I can talk about this forever, but we basically just do a quick little review to see where they are, what do they have, how organizationally we can be helpful. If they ultimately decide that they want to engage a particular financial advisor, we say, look, you can, we will make recommendations, things of that nature. But in those consultations, we're not giving them direct advice. We are mainly listening and providing some guidance to them because it is short. Obviously, it's a first meeting. Hopefully that's helpful.
Great. Well, let's look at the results of our last poll. And you can see it's pretty it's close between the millennials and the Gen X. And Fred, what is your commentary around this specific result? Fred?
I don't think it's surprising, that the millennials who have a longer time horizon in terms of investing and, the ability to sort of catch up, baby boomers being low, but a little bit curious on why the Gen Ys, why the Gen Ys seem to be. Tom, why do you think that might be?
That's a mystery to me too, Fred. I would have thought that it would have been millennials being the most confident because, like someone mentioned, they haven't been through the pain of the ups and downs of the market. And baby boomers, I would have thought, would have been the ones that were less confident. So as far as Gen Ys, that's sort of an interesting phenomenon to me.
Yeah, and it might be that they're dealing with a whole host of issues, which are mortgages and saving for kids' college, is still dealing with student loans. Maybe they're over that, but they've got older, parents that they're also taking care of. But so they might feel squeezed as well. But that's interesting. So
yeah,
because
I think the millennials. I think the millennials will be going through some of those same things as well. But an interesting poll and something to think about. So why don't we go to our next question? And I think this is very important for all of us because liquidity is going to be a very important challenge to Americans right now. And I think a lot of employees are looking for liquidity in their plans. A lot of these people are being laid off, they're losing their jobs, and for many other reasons. So for participants who are considering taking and using their retirement assets as a source of funds, what are some of the options that plan participants should consider, good or bad? And when they're thinking about withdrawing money from their retirement account through distributions, hardship withdrawals, loans, early withdrawals from the plan, from Roth IRAs and traditional IRAs, what are some of the things they should be considering, Cameron? I mean, what are some of the pros and cons to taking various withdrawals like a loan or a hardship withdrawal? What are your thoughts upon that in your commentary?
Yeah, so I mean, first, in a perfect world, you'd want that participant to pull from a non-retirement account, like an emergency savings fund, right? Which is why those one-on-one and financial wellness sessions are important. The reason you don't want somebody pulling from these retirement accounts is because by pulling out the money, right, you're locking in your position, which right now is not a very good position. So you're locking in your losses, but you're also missing out on that compounding growth over the long haul, which a small withdrawal right now has a huge impact on your retirement balance over time because that exponentially grows. So again, pushing for that. But if somebody is actually saying, I need to pull it from my account, right, the first thing I would recommend is looking at your plan document to see which options are allowed to be distributed within your plan. But then second is I'd have that person talk through an advisor or provider to walk through, because here are really the four options, and there's a lot of different considerations for each. So first is the distribution. So this is where somebody can actually take money from the plan without that 10% penalty, but they will be taxed, but they have to meet that retirement age of 65 or be terminated from service. The next best is, assuming you're not in that category, the next best is a loan, right? And the best reason that's the next best is because participants will take it out, but then they actually have to pay themselves back, which is much better for their long-term retirement savings time horizon. And you have flexibility on actually being able to establish loans within your plan, how many people take, etc. So again, read that document on what you can do. The next option is your hardship withdrawals. So this allows the participant to take money out without having to pay it back, but it also allows them to avoid that 10% penalty. They still pay taxes on it, but the key with the hardship withdrawals, they can only take the amount withdrawn for the actual claim that they're making that has caused a financial hardship for them. And so most likely your plan documents using the IRS safe harbor rules, which, the most common are, the reason you could take this out are medical care, tuition, prevent eviction. And then, recently they've added actually a FEMA declared natural disaster, but I think it's important, at least as of last night, FEMA has not established COVID-19 as a natural disaster yet. So something you want to keep an eye on is if that actually meets that FEMA natural disaster criteria there. And then the least ideal one is that early withdrawal, right, where a participant takes their money out, they pay taxes, and they get the 10% hit on it, if they're pulling it out under the age of 65 and it's not a hardship. For IRAs, that's actually a 10% hit if you're under 59 and a half. But again, that's the least ideal situation because you're taking such a big hit on your retirement savings balance.
Right. But I think you bring up a good point, Cameron, and that is for all these people listening on the call, make sure you check with your plan document first. Does your plan allow for loans? What are the payback provisions? Does it allow for hardship? And if it allows for hardship, are they following? What rules are they following? So make sure you check with your plan document first. And the second thing is, as you mentioned, Cameron, it's very important that before you do anything, talk to your plan advisor, because they'll know your plan, and also they'll know what your situation is all about, because each situation is different. And I don't think we can generalize as to, well, if you can do this withdrawal, that withdrawal, because it is so unique to an individual and also to the plan. And what are your thoughts on this, Chris? What's your thought on this?
Well, I think Cameron did a pretty good job. One additional thing that I would say would be to ask the individual, how will the money truly be used? And in instances when we talk to people like this, a lot of times they just want some money now, again, being emotional, for security purposes. So is it for security or is it actually needed? If it's not really needed, then don't take the distribution. We need to be bold enough to help people in this way and say, don't pull the money out if it's just for security purposes. But other than that, I would concur with Cameron. Take the loan first because you're paying yourself back.
Right. And I think it's also important for all the employers in this call to realize that there are other alternatives they should consider, such as having emergency funds, helping employees with that, student loans opportunities. There's so many other things they could potentially draw upon first. And I always say to clients, make sure your retirement plan is your last resort. So I totally agree with your thinking on that, Chris. And what about you, Daniel? What are your thoughts on this relative to taking some of these withdrawals from plans at this point?
Yeah, I think Cameron did a great job. That was well articulated. So honestly, I don't have much more to add. I just think that, look, it's a very difficult time, and everyone's individual situation may present different needs. But no, there's not a lot I could. I will actually give back my time if that's such a thing.
Thanks. Okay, that's great. So let's put up our next poll question, which sort of is in line with what we're just talking about. And here's our poll question, and that is, what percentage of employees have asked you or your management team about distribution, either loan or hardship, from your plan over the last 2 weeks? So while we're doing that and compiling those answers, do we have any questions at this point, Steph, specifically on this topic? Steph?
One question we have is relative to the legislation that may be coming, and is there a possibility that the government would permit loans even though the plan document does not permit loans?
You want to take that, Cameron, so you let off with the last question?
Yeah. I mean, I would say there's a lot of lobbying being happening actually right now by us in the plan advisory community to make this a lot easier, to make the penalties a lot lower for people to get access to their money. What that's actually going to look like, I think, is still very much fluid and up in the air, as this is very fast moving and changing. But with that, if your plan doesn't allow for these solutions, it does just require an amendment. So it is something you can change, and you actually can go back to your administrator to effectuate that change. The other thing I would say is if you're actually looking at pulling back match or other things like that, again, depending on if it's a stated match or discretionary match, stated match will require an amendment to change that. Discretionary, it won't require an amendment, but it will impact your testing. So again, just being aware with what your plan document is and being willing to change it if your facts and circumstances have changed through this is an important next step.
Yeah, and the one thing I caution all employers about, and as well as advisors, is there's a lot going on in Washington right now, as you obviously would agree. But be careful, because as these things come out, they're being talked about, but until they're actually initiated and actually become law or become a regulation, it's not something we can use. So just make sure you work with your advisor to follow that legislation, those regulatory things, because doing so beforehand would not be in the best interest of yourself or your employees, obviously. So now here's the results of the polls, and it's pretty overwhelming, the 0 to 20. And Fred, this I think is an indication of what's happening in the industry right now. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that people, it's a good sign that people are panicking, maybe emotionally, but they're not panicking and they're not acting out. And we did see that even in the 08 and 09, where people, stayed the course, saw the retirement as the last thing that they were going to draw from and the last thing that they were going to stop contributing to. So far, so good on that. And to the question about legislation and everything, next week's town hall, which is very fluid, we're going to be partnering with DECIA and SPARC, who are major associations, and their SPARC's lobbyist and lawyer from Washington is going to go through all the pending regulations, and they're going to have somebody on terms of withdrawals and what they're asking and what's available, and also small business loans with the Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of the legislative questions we're going to be going over, particularly in regulatory next week. But as far as the poll, very encouraging, and hopefully things will settle down, the market will settle down, and people will stay the course as we have it right now.
And I couldn't agree more, Fred. And I think that's why education and constant communication is so important with our clients, the participants, and the plan sponsors, which leads us to our last question, and that is, with most interaction remote right now, how are you communicating with plan sponsor clients and plan participants? And what are you recommending to clients to communicate with their participants? So let's start with you, Chris. What are your thoughts on that relative to this? A lot of people going remote, and how do we communicate with them? And what are you seeing, and what are you doing, and how are you actually implementing a process?
Most of our plan sponsor clients are already accustomed to doing something virtual. We're doing it online, web meetings similar to what we're doing right now. And so when it comes to the participant, communicating in the exact same way, like we're doing right now. And also we offer the availability to schedule something one-on-one. We have an online scheduler. We have our people with their calendars open, so participants at our clients can pick the time they want to talk to someone, schedule that, and then we will reach out and contact them. Most Gen Xers, the millennials, they're accustomed to this already, so it's working very well. I mean, why do we think we have to go on site to communicate? And that can actually be expensive. And what we find is a lot of people are liking this because, well, what happens if I miss the meeting when it's on site? And our goal was not to be on site or even online. We at our firm, we want to help people improve their financial security. So what's ever going to be most effective to get them to make good decisions, help them save, the time horizon diversification, that's key. And that can be done FaceTime, Skype, or Zoom. So I think most of our clients are accustomed to this, and it's just pushing it out to the participants and getting them to sign up and actually taking advantage of it.
But, and Daniel, one of the things we talked about earlier was the fact that we've got these various generational differences. We've got the millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, and baby boomers. Have you found in this sort of this new normal that communicating with those various age groups is different than one over the other? I mean, how do you look at that, and how are you communicating with those various age groups? Because I know sometimes baby boomers are a little more reluctant to do the interaction via the computer or things like that, as opposed to millennials. That's basically the way they've learned to communicate. How do you deal with that, Daniel?
Yeah, I think, when we look at the whole of what we do, we always talk about why we do what we do, right? The what, we know what
right.
we do, but the why is trying to, empower people to make better financial decisions, empower people to get to a position of financial independence or financial real confidence. And so when we think of it in that purview, I think that every generation knows that they're financially anxious, they're financially stressed, regardless of age group. So when we think about how we communicate, we typically with clients, we not only have an investment policy statement, but right up front, we have an education policy statement. So we say, how are we going to communicate with your employees? What are the topics are we going to talk about, and how are we going to deliver that information? So with our clients, we already have a program of how to attack and how to communicate with the different age groups. And whether it's, mail or email or however it is, couldn't agree more with what Chris just said. I mean, today we're doing town halls just like what we're doing today. We do it both for the committee, so we're making sure that we're technically answering questions that they have. And then we're doing it for each of the individual sort of age demographics within the employer base. And we look at their census, we know exactly what that looks like. So again, they should know that we've already got a plan in place to communicate. But to your point, if you're a distribution or logistics trucking company, right, you can't meet face to face. So what we're doing here totally makes sense. Calls, webinars, all the things that Chris just talked about.
Great. And what about you, Cameron? Any other additional information to add to that?
Yeah, we found the most impactful way to communicate with folks, and we've learned this through decentralized workforces. So, I mean, it's just even more applicable to everybody now, is what I call bottom-up education instead of top-down. So instead of saying, hey, here's our groups of these employees, let's give a targeted communication to that group. What we do is we send out an assessment through an app, through text messages, through email drip campaigns to get people engaged, or they tell us, the participants tell us about themselves, where they are financially. We call this our Well Sense program. And then from there, similar to Chris, we have a scheduling tool where they get set up a one-on-one conversation. So when that person then sets up that one-on-one conversation, which often is through a screen share, kind of a Zoom type engagement, so their actual significant other can dial in and have that call with them, even without being on the job site. We know who they are, everything about them, and you can give specific guidance to their exact fact set. Because what we've found is that you could have 3 people all the same age in totally different financial situations. So, you know, how my neighbor came over who I grew up next to, and he works at Disneyland right now. I'm here in Southern California. You know, he just got actually laid off because the parks are closing. Where we're the same age, I'm in a much different situation where I'm still consistently working and all that time, all this time. The message I need right now is very much different than the message he needs from a financial confidence perspective, just giving that as an example. So, that's the idea. That bottom-up approach, I think, is hands down the most impactful, but it still works well to do that top-down, drip campaign as well. You want as much, tailored communication as possible, so that bottom-up, we've just seen to move the needle the most.
No question. And I think it's very important that each one of you has added some very important content around the ability to interact with these various segments and do it effectively, because the more communication and education we have, I think the better off we're all going to be. And before we go to our last poll question, Steph, if you want to, any last questions before we go to our last and finally turn it over to Fred?
Sure. We do have one that I'm going to insert here. And also, I just want to let everybody know that we do have a handout sheet on this site today. So you can check a lot of the questions that you've had are going to be handled in some of the links that we've provided in the one-page handout. So the question is, are many companies suspending the employer contributions? And a similar question from a company, does our company need to still make their 401k contribution each pay period as usual?
Chris, why don't you start us with that?
Okay, well, first of all, yeah, we've had a couple of folks call and inquire about suspending their match. One has. But before you suspend the match, first of all, if you've got a safe harbor, you've got to go through a certain procedure, and you've got a disclosure. I mean, you can't just stop it if you're safe harbor. Now, if you've got a discretionary match, you can, but check your plan document, check with your counsel before you do it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, because a lot of times people say, gee, I want to do this, but their plan document prohibits them from doing so. So it's very important, as we come to the end of this call, to make sure you check with your plan document. Also, there's been a lot of information given to you today. We urge you to talk to your plan advisor. The advisors will play a very important role in this crisis that we're going through right now. And talk to your provider, the ones who provided you with the documentation, and they're the people that work for them as well. And here's our last poll question. But before we do that, this is something we're not going to actually have answers to, but let's put up the last slide, because if you have any questions that haven't been answered today, we'll try our best to get to those, but we haven't been able to do so. Then again, I ask you to check with your advisor, ask those questions of your advisor. But if you have any other thing that is left over that you need information about, here's the email, virtualtownhall@tpsuuniversity.com. And we'll be happy to try to answer any questions that you have. As Fred said, we've got a great program coming next week relative to legislation and regulations about withdrawals and things of that nature, which I think are very important to all of you on this call, as well as future employers and participants. So before we end, I'd like to turn it over to Fred for any last comments. But from my perspective, I want to thank the panelists today, Daniel, Cameron, and Chris, for your great input. And we look forward to all of you working together to bring this to a conclusion. History is a great indicator of what the future holds for us, and I think you've all pointed that out. So before we do that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Fred, for any last comments and anything that you think we need to know before we call it a day.
Yes, I want to, first of all, thank all of our panelists. Great job, and to Tom as well for moderating, and for everyone for calling in. These are difficult times, and I think that, I think one of my favorite thing is, all things shall pass, right? right? Now it feels like this is going to be forever. This will pass. I don't know when, but I know for sure it will. So, staying calm and communicating is very important. We love the interpersonal TPSU programs, and we are going to continue them, but only when we're really sure that it's safe to do that, and for people to congregate again. We're not sure what that is. In the meantime, we'll continue these virtual town halls and these programs for you and communicate with you. I think the upside to this, if there's going to be any, and this will have, this crisis, I think, will have a long-term dramatic effect on us from a business, financial, but also, personally. One of the upsides is figuring out a way to be able to communicate remotely and to be able to effectively help people without having to see them one-on-one, because that's not going to work. We can't get to see everybody one-on-one all the time. So hopefully we can learn a lot and use some remote technology to do that. But we want to stay in touch with you. And again, if you have any questions, you can give us a call at the virtual town hall, and we'll be replaying this webinar. We'll be sending it out in 401k TV, and we'll be writing articles about some of the poll questions, and some of the questions that we had that we weren't able to answer will be in articles and maybe a video that we'll be doing next week for 401k TV. So thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to talking to you again next week at 1 p.m. and it'll be a virtual town hall co-hosted with DCEA, which represents the institutional market, Spark. We're expecting to have Glenn Spencer from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, who's going to discuss what's available to smaller employers from the stimulus package, rules for paying employees, and how to get SBA loans. Mike Hadley from Davis & Harmon will discuss RMDs, required minimum distributions, loan payments, hardship withdrawals, and the request that the industry has made to Congress for additional relief. And Chris Gaston, also from Davis & Harmon, will cover additional stimulus efforts, what's in these proposals, and how long till we can see action, and possibly it will pass. So thanks again for joining, and we look forward to speaking with you again next Friday at 1 o'clock. Thank you.